We're going to roll through the 1094C now, because I do want time at the end. It's 11:17. We will be stopping at noon. Happy to, so that everybody can disperse. We can answer more questions. This will be on the recording if you've got a split at any point in here. I want to get through the 1095C form fairly quickly because we've got a set of 5 or 6 forms that we've pre-filled out, and then we'll take your questions if you have them afterwards. But we will promise that there will be a hard cap on our new information coming to you at noon. So with that, we've talked a lot about the 1094C form, right? This is your cover letter. The IRS deems this your cover letter, under which will be your batch of 1095Cs that you submit for all your employees. So again, the IRS calls this the transmittal document. The reason, and Karen's exactly right, the reason that the IRS looks at this first is because as we get to the 3rd section of it, you'll see that you're telling them how many employees do we have total and how many full-time employees do we have. So to some extent, if you're an employer who hasn't dedicated the time to figure out if you're actually covered by Obamacare, it could be that you filled this out and you didn't have to. So there are aspects of this form that tell the IRS globally what and who you are as an employer. So that's why they look at this before they dig into your 1095Cs. For your purpose, if you're on this webinar, if you know that you're going to be over 50, it's not really going to matter. So you don't have to spend as much time thinking about this form, but we'll cover it in detail. And again, transition relief is long gone. There's no box for that anymore. So we're firing live bullets. Similar to the 1095C forms, this stuff, the applicable large employer information has to match up or they're going to reject your filing.
Why the 2 forms don't look the same, I don't know, but just make sure the same blanks are, because it's the feds.
Okay, and again, they give you obviously a name of person to contact if you mess this up. If you want to put your own name in there, that's fine. If you want to put your superintendent's name in there, you can tell he or she, that's why you make the big bucks, homie. Not my problem after I get these done. Either way is fine.
But the good, you know who they're calling if they get that call.
Yeah,
so
for sure. So line 18 is really, so this is all demographic. I don't think the first part of part 1 of the 1094C is that tricky. Lines 18 and 19 are still part of this part 1. The first one says the total number of 1095Cs submitted. This is probably going to match up with line 20 in part 2, where it also asks again, how many have you submitted in all of your batches for the employer? So when we get to that part, I'll point out the same thing. But really, the IRS knows that in addition to people like schools, they've also got McDonald's that is reporting. So the McDonald's Corporation, depending on how their franchises are set up, may submit multiple batches of 1095s. What this requires you to do is, this said, line 18 says how many 1095s are with this transmittal. Line 20 says how many total 1095s have you sent us, so that they can make sure that they get all the batches under the right employer. For most schools, unless, for example, Omaha or Lincoln does the reporting and they do it per school for some reason, to do it in separate batches, lines 18 and 20 should match up for most of you, because you're probably only making one big submission
only doing this
of all the 1095s for the entire school. And again, line 20 is yes, if you're submitting just one batch. If you're a larger school, on line 19, right? So you're going to check this box on line 19. Okay, so part 2, again, line 20, exactly what we talked about. Looks different than line 18, but should be the same number unless you submit in batches. The total number submitted on behalf of the ALE member. For schools, probably the same amount. Line 21, are you part of an aggregated group? Your answer, no matter which school you are, is no, we are not. So if you'll read on the very next part under line 21, if you answer no, you do not have to fill out part 4 of this form. So we'll have a big red X through it as we go, but all schools in Nebraska should be no on line 21, unless there's something super funky that we don't know about. Don't complete line 4. Okay, this is the part that you're probably going to have to do the most thinking through as you fill out 1094C. You have to check in line 22 all that apply. You may remember that as we, option A and option D actually have not changed for several years. B and C is when we had transition relief, right? The only remaining options now are the qualifying offer method and the 98% offer method. It is possible that depending on how you structure your insurance, for example, if you're offering qualifying offers to at least 98% of your full-time staff, you may be checking both boxes. You have to check both if both apply, Every school in the state, though, is probably checking the qualifying offer method unless you have a full cash in lieu and you're not doing it the right way. Because my guess is all of you, for at least some staff member, including your superintendent, are offering to pay full family, right? You can check box A in line 22, so long as at least one employee is getting a 1A offer code on their 1095C. You probably have dozens of employees in every school in Nebraska who are getting that. So everybody is probably checking box A on line 22. The question for whether you're checking, so B, you're not going to apply, C, you're not going to apply. The question of whether you're also checking D depends upon when you look at your full list of full-time staff members, do you offer qualifying insurance to 98% of those? So if you look at all of your 1095Cs, and 98% of those you've been able to offer, you've been able to put 1A for the offer code, you can actually check the 98% offer method that saves you just a little bit of work later on in this form. So think of all your full-time staff, and think of if 98% of them are going to get a 1A in their box, line 14 of their 1095C. Shoot any questions you have our way. And again, has to be in all 12 months, right? So you can't just luck out during the summer and know that you met the qualifications. It has to be during all 12 months. And this doesn't really matter. If you're using the funky new hire rules in a different way, give your school lawyer a call and talk through this part of it. But again, if this is checked, if you are able to check the 98% offer method, you don't have to fill out column B in part 3. And we'll get to that in a second. Okay. So on to part 3, and I'm sorry, I know we're going really quickly. Shoot any questions in as you have them, and we'll know to slow down. If you look at part 3, the first stuff that it's going to ask you, and if you look at column A, it's going to say, did you offer minimum essential coverage? Check yes for the months in which that was offered to at least 95% of your employees' independence. This is why we talked about that big penalty provision earlier, where you have to offer insurance to at least 95% of your full-time staff, even if it's not affordable. All schools should be checked. If you, for some reason, think that you're not checking all 12 months, call your school's lawyer, because you're probably not thinking about that exactly how the government wants you to think about it, which is fine, it's confusing. But my guess is if you look up there at the all 12 months box in line 23, you're going to check yes for all 12 months that you've offered minimum essential coverage. Okay, so part line or columns B and C, remember this is the part where if you check the 98% offer method, you get to skip this column B.
I was just going to say, you look confused. So it's like if you check A and then if you check D, if you check D, you don't have to fill this part out.
You don't have to fill out column B, you still have to fill out column C. So here's, going quickly, I know, but okay. So column B asks you for, and the reason that this is important to point out the difference, all full-time employees for each month. There is an all 12-month box, but that is just not possible really for a school to hit, I don't think, because the second you have one sub, you don't have the same number. Because you're paying for the sick leave for that teacher who still counts as an employee, and you're paying for the sub, right? So schools simply cannot use all 12 months if you ever use a sub for even one period in one day. So part B, though, asks for only your full-time employees in those months. Column C asks for your total number of employees. So it should be that your number of full-time employees is less than your number of total employees, right? We just talked about the 0.75 FTE para. That para is going in column C because they're an employee, but they're not going in column B because they're never full-time. So that's the key difference between those two lines. Remember that we have the two different types of ways, right, that you can achieve full-time status. So the reason the IRS asks you for this information is because they're going to compare it against the 1095Cs that you submit. So when you've made an assertion that that substitute that was full-time only in April, right, and you've given that person the 1095C, your April column for full-time employees should tick up by 1. That's what they're using that to look at, if that kind of makes sense. How many full-time employees did you have in these months? compared to how many total employees did you have in these months. Your look back period, when you're measuring people's full-time status on the look back basis, that's your floor, because anybody you're treating as full-time after having used the look back data from one summer to the next and looked at that school year, you're treating them as full-time, meaning that's the minimum number of full-time people that you're going to have for each of those months, because the para that was full-time during your look back is going to count as full-time then for each of those months of the next insurance year. Do not include employees in limited non-assessment periods, such as first-year teachers in August, so that when you put the D indicator, if you remember, the 2D indicator is that para who started in August but isn't yet enrolled on insurance. That para is going to be 1H, blank, and 2D in August on their 1095C. That para doesn't count as full-time for purposes of, or that teacher doesn't count as full-time for purposes of this column. I know this is a little confusing. I know we're going through it quickly. I promise we'll take questions. So B asks you for only the number of full-time employees in each of those months. Column C asks you for your total employee count. So this is going to be all of your substitutes, all of your drivers, all of the people that you're giving a W-2 but are not issuing the 1095-C. They're going to be added to this number. So if this number in your column B, which is your total full-time employees, is ever more than this number, you might not have done that correctly. Here's the important thing. You can use your payroll tracking. So if you have the 15th of every month is when you report and when you get the payroll hours, you can use the 15th of every month to figure out how many total employees you paid that month, right? That's entirely permissible.
That should be on your 941 too, right? Your,
Yes.
yes, that
Yes.
number should match up with.
It should.
I think that's probably true. Yeah, I think that's probably correct. And here's why.
You're right.
That's right.
That's
The
right.
IRS uses the common law definition of employee. Here's why this is significant. That means every paraprofessional that you've given a guarantee of reemployment, right, whether you know it or not during the summer,
Kitchen staff too would be the
and
two
kitchen
big ones.
staff and anybody that works 9 or 10 months, they're still a common law employee in the summer. So they're still counting in June and July, even though they're not working for you. So they're not going to be in your full-time employee count. Your numbers for June and July should go down in terms of your full-time employees potentially. But all of those paras that are otherwise working 9 months a year, if they're full-time, they still go into both of these columns in the summer, right? Because we're using the common law definition of employee. So if you treat that para as full-time,
If they can't get unemployment from you, they go in column C.
yep, they're an employee, and they would also be considered full-time if you treat them as full-time during that summer. So if you have full single insurance available for your full-time paras, that para is still getting the insurance in the summer, right? We're still treating that person for Obamacare purposes as a full-time employee. So even though that para isn't stepping foot in the building, he or she is still going to be a tick in each of these columns as a common law employee for column C and as a full-time employee for column B.
Okay, so it won't necessarily match up with.
That's what I was wondering,
Okay,
yes.
right, okay.
Yep.
This and if you're keeping track, this is the third different way we've counted employees today. So if you're
Yep.
saying, wait, that doesn't match up with anything else we've talked about, yes, now you
For
got it.
You don't understand Obamacare unless you're sufficiently confused right now, right? That's,
Because they're counting heads for different purposes for each one of these different things,
Correct.
right? Your ALE counting is different than full-time equivalency counting for qualification, which is different than this count. Super annoying, but
how do I put this in a way that if the government ever sees this, they won't get mad? This is important, right? This is not unimportant. You should do this accurately, but even they concede that they're using the definition of common law employee, which changes from state to state. If this isn't perfect, if you wouldn't be willing to sign on your life because you don't fully understand it, they kind of know, right? They're much more interested in those 1095Cs that you submit. This helps them make sure you haven't completely botched this thing. But I don't think anybody on this webinar, or really any school that's reporting in Nebraska will, if you've given even a little bit of thought to how this actually works for the 1095C purposes. So do the best you can, get this right, of course, but if you don't feel as confident in it as you do your 1095Cs,
this gives us much less heartburn.
I really think the government kind of gets that. And keep in mind, if you can use the 98% offer method in line 22,
You don't have to
you
worry
don't
about it.
have to fill out column B, which is the full-time count.
So a lot of you in this room, I think, just looking at the faces, because you've offered it. Right.
So just, I want to do a quick refresh on that. You can check the 98% offer if you offered affordable coverage with minimum essential coverage and minimum value for 98% of all of your full-time staff members. So it can't just be an offer. That's the difference. That's where they get you. So if you offer a full single to anybody, at least a full single to anybody who's full-time.
You do. HTRS.
We offer it, but if they pay it, so it's not affordable.
Okay. If
So
you
the-
offer it to everybody, then.
If you are willing, if it would have cost them less than $96.71 to take the cheapest single that you offer for all of your staff members that are full-time, you have probably met the 98% offer.
Full-time during 1 month.
Full-time any month that they are full-time.
In which they are full-time.
Correct.
Okay.
So if your offer didn't change from year to year, it should be an all 12-month determination. So really, it's important. It saves you some of the heartache because you don't have to fill out column B. But if you can't check 98% offer method, you just have to fill out column B. And chances are, I know Software Unlimited has it. It will kick out a number that I think you can look at and say, man, that looks about right to me. You know, I'm not telling you not to get it right, but the rules are confusing. So, okay.
Did you have a question?
No, I work way out. I can have them in my hand.
So last part of this, well, two last parts. Oh, I'm sorry. I don't want to.
Well, it's only as good as what you put in. So if at any one point, like I found out one time I was getting my contracted hours in wrong for a handful of people. And that if the data you put in isn't correct, your reports are correct. You can't use
So, to a larger point, I do not believe we sent you what the software company kicked out is sufficient. I will tell you that there are some rumblings like for people that talk about this and do this for like private employers that have said you cannot count. In fact, if you look, there's probably a disclaimer somewhere in Software Unlimited and Harris Aptifund that says, this is your obligation, we're trying to help you with it. I can't blame them for saying we're not willing to take on the burden of making sure it's right. So double check them. But I think it's a useful tool to help with. But I mean, to that point, I get that question. What if I just send them the forms that the software company put in? And I said, I do not believe that is sufficient for you to sign under penalty of perjury at the bottom of the form. So no school that I'm aware of is part of a group employer. So I don't think anybody in column D has to check that box. Column E was transition relief, we don't use it. And if you're not part of a group employer, you do not have to fill out part 4 of this form. And that is the 1094.
Okay, we wanted to be done with this part by 11:30 so we could do some sample forms with you, so we're not doing too bad, so.
Any questions from distance side, text them in, send them in now. Any questions here on the 1094? Or the 1095C for that matter, but we'll get into that too. Do you have any coming in?
Nope.
On that 98%, when you said it's 96.71, okay, but we, like on our paras, they pay 25% of the premium. So we wouldn't be able to check 98% then, would we?
Probably not, would be my guess. Because you can't know, how else do you know if it's affordable? This is where they start to really conflate these rules and it's really stupid. What they should have done is say, you can't check the 98% unless you put 1A in 98% of your 1095Cs, but they don't say that. They actually use the affordable wording, which you can't possibly know. So the question is, so in other words, if you don't know that they're all affordable, then you shouldn't check the box. That's I think the short
And
answer.
there's the only downside is that then you have to fill out that column B.
in part.
But there's no, like if you check just A and not D, there's no like increased likelihood that you'll get a penalty or anything like